tell them what to do.
Hi, Dr. Brett.
Hello.
We're gonna do a quick one on the world wars and the Senate because it creates a general point. And you just said something was beautiful with it's like the it's like the nervous system. That when enough information is there by all these conspiring dendrites and
Yes.
axons, then the neuron fires. And I was trying to say that, well, what I get frustrated by is that, of course, I look at the world not like most people. I look at it as here are the incentives. All right, it's people to follow rational incentives. Everything they say, everything they think, everything is just their excuse for following some set of incentives. So
So
that's
justification.
it's just justification. Well, I mean, it's justification and it's advertising for allies,
But
right?
I want to say this, that you just said the word rational, and I'm like, much of it is not.
Well, I mean, okay, so that's one of the differences when we talk about rational in economics, we
Okay.
don't mean it like rational in philosophy. We mean it like if I were to look at those incentives, I could explain that behavior.
Oh, I see. I see. It explains it, even the
It's
irrational things.
rationally explicable, even
Okay.
if the actor is not acting what we would consider rationally, which means thinking about what he's
Yes,
doing.
it's not this. It's
Yeah,
this. It's this.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the problem is that with compartmentalization, with the special with the we tend to take terms from different disciplines and use them in ours, and then give them specific definitions. And when we talk about rational actors in economics, all we're saying is everyone always acts rationally, meaning if you look at all their incentives, including their emotions and stressors and whatever, their behavior will be rational. The
Right.
only
So I back up because rational is behavioral economics.
Correct, that's right. And so I look at the world through as if we're all bots and we're walking around with advertising on our heads saying, please work with me on this scheme to follow this incentive because I need help, right? That's all I see, right? So we were just going over, so the context is important, is that you were just using the example that you're quite knowledgeable, in my opinion, of the malincentives that lead up to and after the war that caused
World War I.
World War One, right?
Yep.
Right? And so you brought me about. I don't want to go into it, but you said here's one book that covers one school of thought. And so
Yes.
the problem I have with most conservatives, and this is true of both sides, it's just so dumb when liberals do it, we discount it. All right. Right. So that's true because it's always that dumb. But when we get, it's just true. When we get to conservatives, though, they tend to grasp to what they can understand and try to make everything be a nail with that one thing they understand.
Yes.
Right. And so when I was listening to hear them, I'm like, well, there's truth in this, right? I mean, these incentives are real and people would do that following those incentives. The problem is what most people do is say, okay, I understand that, therefore that's what happened. No, it's more like what you said with the nervous system. They're following these incentives. This group is following those incentives. This group is following, and the overlap of all those incentives is what
Yes.
produces the resulting action, right?
Yes.
And so it's hard because you have to know a lot to know all the incentives. So what we were discussing earlier, because you've been trying to make this point to me over and over again. It's not. Well, you're trying to say it's more conspiratorial than you're accepting, Kurt. I think that's what a way I want to. Was that then you're recognizing
I never even thought that by any means.
you
So,
didn't or you
no,
did.
I did not
So
intentionally
what? So
uh,
I'm sorry, I'm
project
putting the
such a
words in your
thought.
mouth. Then
No, I did not project such a. I did not have such a thought.
okay. So
I'm just discussing what I know and
okay,
telling
okay,
you what I
okay.
know. And it
So
seems like that to you.
okay, well, okay, that's fine. Okay, so I interpreted it as
Yes. Yes.
I interpreted it that way. So see how accurate Brad is? It's very charming. Um, so I interpret it as I'm is explaining what you're seeing, and I'm learning from you, of course, when anybody talks to me about what do people think and feel at the time. I see the incentives underneath, And it's either, well, I don't know how they came up with that because the incentives weren't there. Or if they did, what incentives were they following?
Right.
So I sort of do the math, so to speak, on incentives. Anyway, so we're going through this, and I'm like, well, you mean the reality is the financial and commercial interests,
Yes.
both in funding the Bolsheviks,
Yes.
then in funding World War One,
Yes.
and their desire to keep making money off the war
Yes.
so persuasive that it overcame political disincentive and the populations not at all wanting to go to war.
Right. No. So the issue was all that remained was to create the destruction of uh, the the inhibition to go to war in the population by other means until they sufficiently eroded that to cause them to create the opportunity to go to war.
Right. So it's not exactly like the bombing of Pearl Harbor was like, okay, well, that was kind of out of hand.
No, no, it was engineered.
Right. Hold
We
on.
engineered the opportunity for this to occur so that we could get that result, which would cause the public transformation that we needed.
So if we, but if, and I can't comment on that because I don't know. So I'll go. In other words, I don't want just like you don't. There are things you don't want. You when I say you're like I don't want to go along with that. This is one of those things. I'm like I don't know, so I don't want to go along with it.
I understand.
But in World War One, it sure as hell looks contrived to me,
Oh, yes.
right? Because they just made such a big deal.
Wait, so they were talking about the Germans were cutting babies' hands off in Belgium, which is absolute malarkey.
Yes. Well, I mean, and
But
then
there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it. It's propaganda and it's to cause a public
right.
discourse.
And why were the Germans sinking ships? Because we were sending arms on them, right?
And, right. The Lusitania is the key example. And the Germans tried to publish in a multiple newspapers, don't go on it because we're going to sink it. It's carrying arms. And they prohibited the publication of that in most newspapers in the United States, although some papers did publish that warning by the German government. And subsequently, for the audience, the Lusitania was carrying arms. They discovered it on dives.
Right. So what occurred was a bunch of economic incentives, right? Basically, the financial sector, the political sector uh, found power, access to power, because the political sector did have an ambition, right? I mean, the British wanted to build, even expand the British Empire and contain the Germans, right? The Americans wanted to keep growing their trade base, right, with these countries, right? And they didn't want Germany to interfere with that. And both sides were afraid that the Germany plus the Ottomans would be dangerous, right, for trade, right? That's how they were looking at it. And at the intellectuals, at least that's what the story I read when I was young, was that they wanted to maintain the balance of power. Is that really true?
As long as we're in charge.
It's like, yeah, exactly. Well, it's sort of like how America is today. Is we want to maintain the balance of power, which is as long as we're in charge to create the balance of power.
Right, right.
Well, so in that sense, the reason I wanted to make this short was to get across the point that I look at the world as incentives. But if you were to read, say, the Machiavellians, and he does a great job of covering what's his name's coverage of the iron law of oligarchy, which is that in any decision-making pyramid,
Yes.
the decision that gets made is not the best one. It's the one that can get made.
Oh, yes, it's like behavioral economics too.
Exactly. Right. It's the one
like, okay, that gets enough excitement to cause the action potential out.
Correct. And you've been doing this, which is I'm thanking you, which is showing that there's no difference between what goes on in the neurons in our head and the expression of those neurons among people.
Social environment, right.
Right. So in this case, what I was trying to get across, that my complaint about conservatives is this thing of, okay, I see an issue. It's doubling down on this one thing
Right.
instead of saying, okay, I got this. What's the next one?
Right.
And what's the next one? And
Right.
what's the next one? And what they tend to do is they look not for incentives, but for moral.
Ah, but it goes to this function which I described, and this is what caused you to want to make this little video, which is behavioral economics.
Yes.
Which is I discovered an answer that sufficiently causes me to act, and I'm sticking to it until
Yes.
it fails.
The problem is the fail cycle for bad ideas can be very long. And it's not that the ideas are bad, it's that they're fragments. So when you go to someone and there's like 150 influences that
Yes.
end up in this bad freaking decision, or this not marginally, not, in other words, there are better decisions than this one. It's because of the competition for coherence among all these conspiracies,
Yes.
right? Whether they're just incentives or they're conspiracy or they're organized effort, whether they have self-interest or which is material, or self-interest which is attention, or
Right.
self-interest that with self-interest for a status. So they can have any spectrum of interests, and these sort of threads, they wire up into this great big. Now, I think of it as tubes, but I mean, if you want to look at it as neurons, it makes a lot more sense,
About the same.
right? Because it's the same, and and you have to find a solution that keeps enough people happy in your network in order to carry through with whatever the decision that gets made. And so it's this huge network effect below. And so when people have the same similar information and values, they can more likely achieve the optimum solution. But when they have dissimilar values and interests, they will not produce the optimum solution. They will do some variation from the optimum solution. And when people have excessive influence over the information that people have that excites their values, positive or negatively, then you're most likely to get a divergent direction. Does that make
Welcome,
sense?
welcome to the modern moment.
Welcome to the modern world.
That
So
was awful.
what?
That was awful.
So one of the things I felt in my work on the evolution of Abrahamism is that I talk about the Marxist sequence. But you know what I don't do is the professionalization of it by the Soviets.
Oh
I
yes.
feel like really stupid about this for some reason.
Oh my.
Right? It's just because, I'm always worried about incentives in the subconscious. This is, in other words, these two things are related. So I just think about the Marxist sequence, the feminine Abrahamic Marxist sequence of the female means of warfare. I think of that as just the natural expression of incentives at different scales. So, among women, among the early primitive civilizations, among the industrialized civilizations, but the incentive is the same, and
Yes.
techniques are the same across all scales. But however, I fail to account for the fact that, wait a minute, just as the Europeans developed rule of law and the Jews developed Abrahamic religion, and the Marxists produced the pseudoscience version of that religion, the Soviets actually took it and made a secular political specialization of that art of deception intentionally. So they switched it from being a subconscious incentive to a deliberate strategy.
Yes.
Makes sense? And so they actually weaponized the female incentive. And so what
Yeah.
we're seeing today in the post-war era is not only it's almost, I hate to say this. You ready for this?
I'm
It's
ready.
the whitening of the white mailing of the feminine Jewish strategy. Does that make
Yep.
sense? In other words, they made it a science.
Yes.
They didn't make it an intuition or an ideology that was merely expressed through its complete its application of intuitions or application of traditions or inclusion of myths, but they actually turned it into a science. So
Yes.
the Soviets basically scienced the female Jewish Abrahamic
Yes.
Marxist sequence, and I think the combination of making it a science and combining it with modern technology is what made it so devastating. Um,
This makes me want to point to the works of Yuri Bezmenov,
yes,
and his other name is David Schumann,
yes,
who was a Soviet defector in 1970 to Canada. He was a KGB officer who lectured in the early 1980s, and you should study his works, the audience, if you should be so interested in understanding the science of destabilization and demoralization that the Soviets created and intended to invoke upon the West.
right. So I would just say, what do you do? What does demoralization do? It breaks down trust between individuals, groups, individual
Yes,
sects.
it's destructive of certain group capital.
Correct. So anyway, I've actually collected a bunch of other books to read on the subject. As you know, we have too much going on right now for me to
We are busy, busy boys.
sidetrack into it. Um, but there are books written by people who specifically addressed it. No one has done what we've done, which
No.
is science it all the way down to, okay, this is the logic underneath what they're doing. Um, and the point I wanted to say I was remiss about is because I do look at the world as incentives, and I do look at blah 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 as blah blah blah, right? I just looked at the incentives. I failed to adequately integrate the professionalization
Mm.
of it by the Soviets because it's what everybody uses today. It's what the left uses today, whether it be what's his name, social organizing, the Marxist guy of the 60s, 70s.
Uh, A begins with an A.
Yes,
Saul Alinsky.
Alinsky, all right, or it'd be him or Hillary Clinton for that matter. She's a Leninist. I think that the best piece I've read so far is the Trotskyists' understanding of what had to be done and how to use it. And so I want to do as much research as I can on it so I can as thoroughly document it as I have the other things. But I want to bring it up because it's related to this problem of, okay, great. I have the problem of I don't listen to what people say. I only look at incentives, right? Because I just see it as all bullshit bot stuff. But that, but um, but in doing so, you can also overlook the people who master bullshit, how to manipulate bullshit bot stuff. Does that make sense?
Oh
And
yeah.
so it's been helpful for me to understand this because I can then see how the other side views the world by taking words seriously. I mean, really, I don't take words very
Oh
seriously.
my.
Um, all I hear is what's between them. Well, I mean, you've said the same thing recently, where it's like, yeah, all I see is, would you say, all I see is neurons firing or something like that?
Just morons.
It's just neurons. All right. So that's our short for today.
Well, this is my opportunity to shine, Kurt, because this is my opportunity to tell the nice people they might hit the subscribe button or the like button and the like button and the notification bell. And good Lord, leave comments because this was such a fine little talk,
Okay.
right?
Thank you very much, Brad, and thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoy. Hope you enjoy our work. This is Kurt Doolin and Brad Whirl for the Natural Law Institute. Have a great day.
Bye.
Now watch, I'll have trouble finding the stop button
Good
again.